Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
The Abyssal Lords, waiting patiently for the golden cocoon to hatch, all stirred when they noticed the fluctuation of power that was emanating from it. All of them became excited because this was a sign that the high-ranking abyssal creature would soon emerge from it and appear before them. Everyone wanted to make this powerful abyssal creature their subordinate, but because of the established rule, they had no choice but to wait and see what kind of creature it was. Several minutes passed, and finally, the cocoon slowly opened up like a blooming flower, revealing a naked beauty with long pink hair and two small horns on her forehead. She had a tail, and on its end was a spade-like tip, allowing the Abyssal Lords to instantly know what kind of creature she was. The majority of them sighed before shifting their gaze to the incubus demigod, whose devilish smile was filled with satisfaction as a faint tinge of lust momentarily appeared in his eyes before vanishing within their beautiful golden depths. "Congratulations, Narcissus," one of the demigods said. "Not only did you get a powerful subordinate, but she is also a beauty. I'm sure that you're going to have fun training her to become your favorite pet." "Thank you," Narcissus replied. "I was just lucky that the one born from the cocoon was a transcendent succubus. I hope that everyone will abide by the pledge we have all agreed upon and not snatch this beautiful lady away from me." The other demigods grunted their displeasure, but since it was a rule that everyone had acknowledged, none of them made a move. They merely watched as the handsome incubus went to claim his prize. Narcissus' lustful gaze wandered over the beautiful succubus body, and the smile on his face grew wider as he approached her. What a lucky day, Narcissus thought. A calamity-ranked transcendent being hatching from a cocoon is a very rare occurrence. Not only is she very powerful, but she is also a chaste maiden. I'll happily absorb her essence, making myself much stronger than before. Narcissus then landed a meter away from the succubus, whose eyes slowly opened, looking in front of her in a daze. "Such a delectable little thing you are," Narcissus said as he placed his finger under the succubus' chin, raising it until her eyes met his own. "The name is Narcissus, and from now on, I will be your lord and master." Just as he was about to lower his head to give her a kiss on the lips, marking her as his own, the young lady raised her hand and slowly pushed his face away from her. "You're not him," the succubus said softly. "You're not the one I am waiting for." Narcissus, who wasn't able to claim the maiden's kiss, arched an eyebrow as he looked at the beautiful lady in front of him, whose golden eyes glowed faintly with power. "Oh, are your memories of your past life still intact?" Narcissus asked in a playful tone. "Then tell me, what is the name of this person you are looking for? Is he perhaps a man?" The beautiful succubus frowned before she shook her head. "I don't know," the succubus replied. "All I know is that you're not him." A sneer appeared on Narcissus' face as he held Aurora's chin with his thumb and index finger, forcing her to look at him. "Listen here, you little slut," Narcissus stated. "I do not care how many men, demons, or devils you'll mate with in the future. But remember this, the one who will be plucking your cherry today will be me, Narcissus. So, give me what I want before I get angry." The incubus tried to kiss the succubus for the second time. The succubus tried to resist, but she was far weaker than the abyssal lord who had bedded nearly all the beautiful demons and women that he came across in the abyss, with the exception of Queen Rhiannon, who resided on the 13th layer. Just as he was about to succeed in claiming his prize, a hand grabbed hold of his head and yanked him away from the pink-haired succubus, who suddenly found herself in the arms of a red-headed incubus. "I finally found you, Aurora," Lux said hoarsely, while still in his incubus disguise. "I'm glad you're safe." His clothes were bloody, and there were several bruises and shallow cuts on his handsome face. Even so, he looked at her affectionately and summoned a blanket to wrap around her, preventing anyone from ogling the naked body of the woman he loved. "You," the pink-haired succubus cupped Lux's face. "It is you. You're the one I'm looking for." "MMM." Lux nodded. "Let's go, Aurora. I'm taking you back with me." However, at that exact moment, an enraged voice reverberated in the surroundings. "You're not going anywhere," Narcissus shouted. "If you don't want to die, leave her. Otherwise, I won't spare your pathetic life," mongrel. Lux ignored the incubus, whose body was radiating with undisguised killing intent. The Abyssal Lords, who were watching this scene, all laughed and cheered, looking forward to an entertaining show. They were still feeling bitter that Narcissus was the one who managed to get the powerful and beautiful succubus as his subordinate. Because of this, they had no intention of helping him to kill the incubus who had gotten in his way. They were even secretly hoping that the incubus could kill Narcissus so that they would no longer need to abide by the agreement and be able to claim the beautiful succubus as their own subordinate. You may feel a little uncomfortable, but bear with me for a while, okay? Lux told Aurora, who was looking at him with a faint smile on her face. Aurora even closed her eyes and nestled her head against the incubus Lux's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Holding her firmly in both hands, Lux glanced at the enraged incubus, who was now charging at him with unrestrained blood lust. At that moment, the neighing of a horse reached Lux's ears, making him look up at the sky. Sleipnir dove toward the ground, and the old man extended his hand to grab Lux so that they could escape from the encirclement of the Abyssal Lords. I said, "You're not going anywhere." Narcissus roared in anger because the incubus was still not paying attention to him. When he was only a few meters away from Lux, a four-armed creature rose up from the incubus shadow and collided with the Abyssal Lord. All Might grabbed both of Narcissus' fists with two of his hands, leaving the other two free to pummel the Abyssal Lord's body with punches that made clapping sounds each time they connected with his body. On the other hand, Lux grabbed hold of James' hand, allowing himself to be swept away in a heartbeat. After seeing this scene, all the Abyssal Lords moved in unison to stop the intruders from escaping. They didn't mind if Lux fought Narcissus to death, but they would not stand idle and allow him to escape from right under their nose. Lux knew what they were thinking, but he didn't mind it one bit. They had come prepared for war, and because of this, he threw two blast bombs at the pursuing Abyssal Lords, which detonated mid-air, causing a nuclear-level blast that blew away his enemies, seriously injuring those who were caught with the blast. He didn't have time to deal with them individually, for he knew with every fiber of his being that Daniel had already become aware of his presence. Since that was the case, his priority was to escape and return to the 13th layer of the abyss, where the primordial golem of destruction, Antero, was waiting for their return. Are you sure they'd be going this way? An Abyssal Lord on the 105th layer of the abyss asked her comrade, who was standing at the portal in front of her with arms crossed over her chest. Yes, the red-haired demoness replied. According to those on the 109th layer, the fugitives are trying to escape to the upper layers. Just like us, they are mobilizing their forces to block their escape. At that exact moment, the portal in front of them glowed brighter, which was a sign that someone was coming from the other side. Get ready, the Abyssal Lord shouted to her forces. Prepare to fig. Before she could even complete her words, a giant skeleton king emerged from the portal and kicked her away. Countless undead monsters surged forth like a tide, attacking the Abyssal Legion that waited for them at the entrance. The 10-meter-tall Orion charged forward like a juggernaut, sending everything in front of him flying. He was clearing a path so that the 8-legged horse behind him could run unhindered across the battlefield, charging straight toward the portal that would lead Lux and James to the 104th floor. Due to the commotion they had caused on the 111th layer, all the Abyssal Lords on the upper layers had been alerted of the fugitives' escape route. Avernus swooped down from the sky and laughed like a madman. Countless undead dragons and wyverns flew alongside him, unleashing their dragon breaths at the abyssal forces on the ground, destroying their formation and making them scream in pain, anger, and frustration. Right beside Lux, a black coffin was flying. Riding on top of it was none other than Leonidas, who had summoned countless shields to protect Sleipnir from the ranged attacks that were being launched in his direction. Calypso hovered above the shields and unleashed countless golden beams of light, targeting the range attackers who were attacking her master. The battlefield was quite chaotic, but the undead didn't mind it one bit. Corpse explosion. Asmodeus and his clones raised their hands simultaneously as they rode on top of the Death Tyrant's head, Morpheus, casting one of the most destructive spells that killed everyone, regardless if they were friends or foes. Soon, A series of loud explosions detonated on the battlefield. All the corpses that had littered the ground detonated with a gigantic force, sending shrapnel of bone and flesh flying in every direction. "You bastard!" The red-haired demoness charged towards Asmodeus with the intent to kill. However, before she could even come close, a draconic tail lashed out towards her and sent her flying in the opposite direction. "Ha ha ha." Avernus laughed happily. "Better luck next time. Be asterisk take." The giant skeleton king then swung its bone scepter, swatting away the countless abyssal creatures in its path, and created deep fissures in the ground, sending those who were in its path to fall to their doom. After nearly half an hour of this madness, Lux finally saw the portal that would lead them to the 104th layer. With a mental command, he ordered Asmodeus to step aside as he threw the blast bomb in his hand towards the portal. He already knew what was waiting for him on the other side, so he intended to send them a surprise gift that would blow them all to oblivion. Just as he expected, the moment he stepped into the 104th layer, a giant smoking crater appeared in front of him. The Abyssal Legion that was waiting for his arrival was in disarray, with their Abyssal Lords suffering serious injuries. Lux was sure that these Abyssal Lords would be at the forefront of their army in order to raise the morale of their troops. Because of this, they were prone to Lux's blast bombs, which were strong enough to wipe an entire city from the face of the world. James laughed after seeing Lux summon his undead legion to charge ahead of him. This reminded him of his grandson, who once fought against the elves using his beast army to decimate their forces. "I'm going ahead, Master," All Might said before running at full speed, making it look as if he was teleporting every 100 meters. Avernus, who was feeling competitive, also flew ahead, and his majestic form, which was 30 meters long, served as the banner for Lux's undead army to follow. The half-elf's plan was not to fight his opponents in a death match, but simply charge ahead using whatever means necessary. As long as they were able to get to the 13th floor, their enemies would not be able to follow them, even if they tried. While all this mayhem and destruction was happening, something else was happening on the 13th floor, which was making even the primordial golem of destruction, Antero, feel anxious. "Take a deep breath, Your Majesty," a purple-haired succubus said as she dabbed the sweat on her queen's forehead. "It will be fine." Queen Rhiannon gritted her teeth as she felt the contractions happening inside of her body. The baby was about to be born, and the succubi who had experience in handling childbirth was inside her bedroom, helping her deliver the baby safely. "I can see the head," one of the succubi said. "Just a little more push, Your Majesty. The baby is almost out." Although she was already feeling weak due to trying to deliver the baby for almost 18 hours, she held strong because she knew that it would soon be over. A moment later, the cry of a baby spread inside the room, making the succubus queen sigh in relief. The succubi all cheered and congratulated their queen on a successful delivery. "It's a healthy baby girl, Your Majesty." The purple-haired succubus cleaned the baby before wrapping her into a clean blanket. "She's very beautiful." Queen Rhiannon looked at the child, whose body was as white as cream and skin as smooth as silk. She looked at her daughter lovingly as she held her close to her bosom. Little did the succubus queen know that Dia's father was currently bulldozing his way toward the 13th layer of the abyss, with a pseudo-god hot on his heels. "The undead are truly fascinating," James commented as he held Sleipnir's reins in his hands. "They never get tired, so they are perfect for long battles." They had just passed the 50th floor and were now on their way to the 49th floor. Although the undead didn't feel any exhaustion, the same couldn't be said for Lux, James, and Sleipnir. It had been a few days since their escape from the 111th floor, and they hadn't rested since then. It was a non-stop cycle of fighting and running for their lives. As James had kindly put it, there was no rest for the wicked. Lux could only smile bitterly at the old man's attempt to liven up the atmosphere. But he couldn't really enjoy it as they were facing hordes of abyssal monsters attacking them from all directions. Tension was at an all-time high because they were doing their best to reach the 13th layer of the abyss before Daniel could catch up to them. Lux's spy on the 69th layer confirmed that Daniel had already passed through the portal and was now headed to the 68th layer. It was a race against time, So although Sleipnir was already tired, it continued to run in order to deliver the half-elf and his lover to the 13th layer, where they would be safe. Suddenly, the Doom Knight gangbanger whom Lux had left on the 68th floor confirmed that Daniel had appeared on the floor. However, not even half a minute later, Daniel had been spotted on the 67th floor. Half a minute after that, he was already on the 66th layer, which made Lux's face turn pale. He didn't know how Daniel was doing it, but the speed at which he was advancing through the abyss had suddenly gone by leaps and bounds. No good. Daniel will catch up to us soon, Lux said with a grim expression on his face. Can't we go faster? We can, James replied, but we don't know what is waiting for us on the other side of the portals ahead of us. I'm sure that they are now aware of your strategy of throwing a blast bomb at the portal to clear the way. It doesn't matter, Lux stated. We'll just brute force our way like usual. Knowing that Lux was right, James apologized to Sleipnir before asking him to go at his full speed. The eight-legged horse obeyed, and its speed increased exponentially, even leaving shockwaves behind as it charged toward the portal that led to the 49th layer. When Lux and James appeared on the next layer, they were prepared to duke it out with the Abyssal Legion waiting for them. However, the first thing that they saw was the giant golem of destruction, Antero, terrorizing the Abyssal army that was waiting for their arrival. At the mere sight of Antero, the Abyssal army all fled because fighting against him was complete suicide. Seeing this, Lux couldn't help but feel thankful that the golem of destruction actually moved to lend them a hand. Antero, who had just obliterated the abyssal monsters who refused to run away, glanced in Lux's direction. Good, Antero stated after seeing Aurora in Lux's embrace. Hurry, Daniel is coming. Using all the strength it could muster, Sleipnir headed towards the portal at the speed of lightning. Since Antero had already cleared the way for them, nothing blocked their way, so their advance went smoothly. After Antero passed through the portal of the 49th layer, it casually sealed the portal, preventing anyone from being able to travel through it. The Golem of Destruction didn't have time to fully seal the portal, and the most his seal could do was prevent entries through it temporarily, lasting only for a few minutes. However, those precious few minutes were enough to stop Daniel, who arrived 3 minutes later on the 50th layer. When he realized that his way was sealed, an angry roar escaped Daniel's lips as he crazily attacked the portal in order to destroy Antero's seal. However, the seal held, lasting for a full minute before it was destroyed. Daniel did the same to the other portals that he came across, but by the time that he passed through the 14th layer of the abyss, Lux, James, and Sleipnir had already stepped through the portal that led them to the 13th layer. Antero, who was last to enter the portal, hurriedly sealed it again. Since he had already made preparations in advance, the seal on the 14th layer's portal couldn't be broken by normal means. But in order to make sure that nothing would get in the way, he used his entire body to block the portal leading to the 13th layer. As the seal he had placed started to take effect, an angry roar escaped Daniel's lips as he smashed his fist against the portal that led to the 13th layer, but it didn't budge. No matter how fierce and relentless his attacks were, nothing happened and the portal remained blocked. Damn it! Daniel cursed loudly. If Antero hadn't left the 13th layer of the abyss to help clear the abyssal legions that blocked the other portals, Daniel would have caught up with Lux. The outcome of that potential clash was already set in stone because the half-elf was not the pseudo-god's match. Only when they managed to pass through to the 13th layer did Sleipnir stop running and broke into an exhausted walk. You did well, Sleipnir. James lightly patted the horse's neck. Well then, since we're already here, why don't you two lovebirds go to the castle while I let my poor horse rest a while? Sounds good. Lux nodded and thanked James for everything he had done for him. He also thanked Sleipnir, earning a soft neigh from the exhausted horse. After that, he carried Aurora and flew toward Queen Rhiannon's castle. After Queen Rhiannon's child, Dia, was born, Antero decided to leave the 13th layer and look for Lux. He knew that the half-elf was not a match against Daniel, so it decided to extend its help to the father of Queen Rhiannon's newly born daughter. The Golem of Destruction only treated one person in the abyss as family, and that was the succubus queen. Now that she had given birth to a daughter, Antero felt like a grandpa and decided to look for Dia's father, who was trying to save Aurora. When Lux landed near the castle, he immediately noticed that all the succubi seemed to be happy. Because of this, it took them a while to notice his arrival. "Lux, you came at the right time," a purple-haired succubus said. "Our queen has just given birth to a beautiful baby girl. You should see her. Dia is so adorable and cute." She had given birth? Lux felt as if all the breath had been sucked out of his lungs after hearing the succubus words. "Yes," the purple-haired succubus replied. "You should go and see her. Also, who is she? She looks very similar to our queen." Lux did not bother to respond to the succubus comment about Aurora and walked toward Queen Rhiannon's room briskly. He was still carrying Aurora in a princess carry, and although he tried his best to remain calm, his heart was showing what he was truly feeling as it beat wildly inside his chest. Just as Lux was about to open the door of Queen Rhiannon's bedchambers, he heard the crying of a child from the other side, which almost melted his heart. Aurora looked at him in confusion and wondered if he was going to enter the door or not. Perhaps feeling impatient, she reached out her hand and opened the door on her own before looking at the half-elf with a smile. "Thank you," Lux said as he entered the room. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt that his entire body had become as heavy as lead. Each step took him so much effort, making him wonder if the adrenaline rush he had felt during his mad escape from the lower layers of the abyss had faded, leaving him feeling weak and lethargic. "Who is it?" Queen Rhiannon, who had sensed the presence of someone entering the room, asked. She still hadn't fully recovered from her long labor, and she was currently breastfeeding Dia because the child was hungry. At that moment, she heard a familiar voice, which put her heart at ease. "It's me," Lux said as Aurora parted the bed curtain. "I'm back, Rhiannon." The succubus queen looked at the half-elf's exhausted face, making her feel a slight ache in her heart. However, when her eyes landed on the young lady in his arms, she felt her heart skip a beat. "Aurora," Queen Rhiannon muttered as she gazed at her first daughter, whom Lux had successfully rescued a few days ago from the 111th layer of the abyss. Aurora didn't react to Queen Rhiannon calling out to her because her gaze was focused on the baby girl, who was currently breastfeeding in her arms. Aurora then shifted her gaze from the baby to Queen Rhiannon. "Can I hold her?" Aurora asked. Queen Rhiannon nodded. "Of course, but let her finish feeding first. Don't worry, it won't take long." For the first time since she was born, something else stirred inside Aurora's heart aside from the affection she felt toward the half-elf who saved her. She could sense Lux's blood flowing inside the baby girl in Queen Rhiannon's arms, so for her, the baby was a very precious thing that she wanted to hold. A few minutes later, Dia finally finished feeding. The baby then found herself staring at a beautiful succubus who looked very much like her mother. Aurora couldn't help but smile as she looked at the baby, whose golden eyes matched hers. She then lowered her head to kiss Dia's forehead, making Lux and Queen Rhiannon feel happy inside their hearts. After holding Dia for a few minutes, Aurora returned the baby to her mother before walking back to Lux, pressing her body against his. "I want a baby too," Aurora said. "Give me one." Queen Rhiannon had already noticed that Aurora had been completely reborn as a succubus and seemed to have forgotten about Lux, making her feel a bit sad. However, Lux didn't share her opinion because something was telling him that Aurora still had her memories. He was certain that once certain conditions were met, her memories of him would return, completing their reunion in the abyss. "Lux, Aurora has been reborn as a transcendent succubus," Queen Rhiannon stated. "Also, I no longer sense the aura of misfortune in her body or soul." When the half-elf heard Queen Rhiannon's words, he realized that he hadn't had the time to check Aurora's condition because they were busy escaping. But now that he could check it without worry about being hounded to death by Daniel, Lux noticed that Queen Rhiannon's statement was true. Aurora no longer had the aura of misfortune's beloved, which made him very happy. Had she still been cursed with misfortune, our escape would have been a difficult one, Lux thought. Fortunately, she is no longer bound by the curse. Lux was truly happy with this kind of development, but Aurora's gaze and touch were igniting the dormant desire inside his body. A transcendent succubus needs to mate as soon as possible so that her mind and power can be stabilized, Queen Rhiannon said. It will be best if you do it now, or else she might attack you and force herself upon you. Feel free to use any of the guest rooms. You can come back once you've calmed her down. The half-elf nodded in understanding and left the room with Aurora. Queen Rhiannon, on the other hand, shook her head because their family tree was a bit messed up at the moment. Since it was complicated, the succubus queen decided that it would be best to ignore it for the time being since it was not that important. Suddenly, the castle shook, making the queen arch an eyebrow. However, after realizing that the source of the shaking was coming from one of the guest rooms, a faint smile appeared on her face as she looked at the sleeping baby in her arms. It seems that Aurora is taking the lead, Queen Rhiannon muttered. That's my daughter, all right? The succubus queen didn't tell Lux that if he were to make love with a transcendent succubus who was still a maiden, her essence would flood his body, giving him incredible strength and power. Truth be told, it was enough for the half-elf to break through to the supreme rank, especially since any kind of boost to his stats and power would be multiplied by 3 due to him being a progenitor of the Heavens Necromancer job class. The castle shook for a second time, then a third. It shook a few more times, making even the succubi living in the castle wonder what the hell was happening. Fortunately, Queen Rhiannon informed them that their guests were just having a very passionate round of lovemaking, making the succubi blush. They didn't mind being roughed up by someone as handsome as Lux, but they also knew that he was already their queen's property, so they could no longer touch him. Just as everyone was getting used to the shaking, something unexpected happened. A burst of power reverberated through the entirety of the castle, making the succubi think that they were under attack. However, their queen calmed them down and simply told them that Lux was undergoing a breakthrough. In just a short span of time, the half-elf, who had just become a saint not too long ago, had become a supreme, granting him powers that even he was not prepared to have. Inside the room, the steady breaths of a sleeping young man echoed faintly. Although the room was dimly lit, Aurora could see her lover clearly as if it was day. She looked at him affectionately and gently brushed aside the hair that clung to his face. His hair had grown longer, Aurora thought as she lightly caressed the side of Lux's face. The half-elf was in deep sleep, so he remained undisturbed by her loving touch. She felt a faint ache in her heart, knowing that her lover looked very tired not because of their lovemaking, but because of everything that had happened since he had been freed from the block of crystal. The news of his lovers losing their memories of him was a heavy blow that he was unable to easily recover from. Yet, just as things were getting a bit better, the Abyssal Lords attacked Agartha, forcing him to leave Iris and Kai behind in order to accompany her in protecting her kingdom from those who wished to destroy it. Unfortunately, Nyarlathotep didn't care whether he destroyed friend or foe alike. He simply wanted chaos and destruction, so he chose to sacrifice his subordinates in order to empower his suicide attack, which would have wiped Agartha from the face of the world. In order to prevent that from happening, Aurora made the ultimate sacrifice by activating the Pillar of Eternity that rested inside her soul, protecting everyone from harm. After her death, Lux didn't waste any time in order to come and find her. Even though the connection of the Abyss from Solais and Elysium had been severed, he still found a way to come and save her, arriving on time before the Incubus Lord, Narcissus, claimed her as his woman. Right now, Aurora's heart was overflowing with love and happiness for the man who had risked everything to find her again. The moment Lux took her innocence for the second time, Aurora recovered her memories as well as the memories of times long past. The power that had been lying dormant in her soul for hundreds of years had finally awakened, sharing her essence with the half-elf, whom she had chosen to be her partner for life. Even though Aurora didn't remember Lux right after she hatched from her cocoon, her instincts were calling out to him, trying to find him. This was why when Narcissus tried to kiss her, she pushed him away. She didn't want something that was important to her to be taken away by someone whom her heart didn't choose. Her primal instincts knew that there was someone who loved her very much, and she would give only that person her everything the moment she met him again. For hundreds of years, I've been born as the unluckiest girl in the world, Aurora muttered softly. Now, I feel like I'm the luckiest. After saying those words, she planted a kiss on Lux's forehead, marking him as her man. The reason why Lux managed to reach the supreme rank was not just because he absorbed Aurora's essence, but because he had also absorbed a bit of her divinity. "I didn't think that I would fall in love with a mortal," Aurora said with a smile. "But it doesn't feel so bad. If it's you, I'm sure that this lifetime will be filled with happiness and love." Lux didn't know that his lover was not only a transcendent succubus, but also the former goddess of Solais, the person who stopped Daniel from achieving godhood. With her sacrifice, she saved the world, but in return, her soul was cursed, taking in all the misfortunes of the world. After countless cycles of birth and reincarnation, her suffering only stopped after her fateful meeting with Lux. Now, she was no longer alone. She had a lover who would go to the abyss and back only to find her. She had a family in Agartha who loved her. She had sisters who shared her love with the half-elf currently sleeping by her side. Last, but not the least, she now had a little sister, born from the seed of the same man whom she had made love to just an hour ago. "So is Jia my sister or my stepdaughter?" Aurora said in a teasing tone as she lightly poked the sleeping half-elf's nose. "To think that you were able to make the succubus queen give birth to your child. I don't know if you are lucky or unlucky." A giggle escaped her lips because she thought that Lux's bad luck was all because of her. "Rest, my love." Aurora wrapped her arms around the sleeping half-elf before resting her head on his chest. "You deserve it." Indeed, Lux deserved his rest. The former goddess of Solais knew that the moment her lover opened his eyes, he would need to fight once again in order to save Elysium, as well as the dying world of Solais. If possible, Aurora didn't want him to carry this burden, but she understood that only he would be able to turn the tide of battle in their favor. "If you succeed, and we live through this ordeal, I will give birth to lots of your babies." Aurora smiled. "I hope you'll be ready for that, Lux." This was the first time in all of her lifetimes that she had considered giving birth to children. It was a very mysterious feeling. Aurora simply felt that if it was with him, then she would be able to handle that much. While the former goddess hugged her lover to sleep, Antero finally stood up and walked toward the castle in the distance. Daniel had stopped attacking the portal from the other side, so there was no need to worry. The seal he had placed in the portal was nearly indestructible. As the first being born since the creation of Abyss, Antero had a lot of control over it. Sealing portals was not a big deal for him. If he wished for it, he could instantly travel from one layer to another layer, without needing to pass through any of the portals. The castle was silent as everyone rested for the night. Although day and night were not really a concept in the Abyss, there were still times of the day when everyone felt like resting. Antero had still not seen Dia because he had left right after she was born in order to find the little one's father. Now that he had some free time, he would ask little Rhiannon to show him her baby, which he now considered to be his granddaughter, whom he decided to call Little Dia. Elysium. After the migration of Karshvar Draconis and the Crystal Palace to the lands of Aspor Frieden, Princess Valerie and Prince no longer showed themselves to the public. Hirswith also announced that she had taken the two as her disciples. As someone who was now beloved by everyone, Hirswith's declaration was received positively by the citizens of both Dragon Kingdoms. The preparations for the counterattack were well underway. Although the bulk of the Draconic armies, as well as the members of the Alliance who decided to join them in battle, were going to leave, they couldn't leave their people completely unprotected. So, they left a quarter of their kingdom's forces to defend their people and maintain order. The elves would also be sending a delegation to help the Alliance fight against the Abyssal Lords, who had thoroughly conquered the western region of Elysium. There was also one powerful faction who had made a name for themselves during the Abyssal invasion. It was none other than the one and only mythical guild in the world, Heaven's Gate. Led by Great General Garrett, the floating fortress, which was called Edia by the majority of the Alliance, would also join the war. Inspired by their ability to travel anywhere, King Azza and Kyoza decided to bring along 3 uninhabited islands from their own domain, which they would also use as flying fortresses to house their armies. Currently, everyone was busy building barracks and houses on these floating islands, which would serve as accommodation for the soldiers. After hearing about the Alliance's all-out counteroffensive, the Abyssal Lords on the north, south, and central regions of Elysium migrated west in order to join Nyarlathotep's abyssal army. Days turned into weeks, and finally, after a month, all preparations had been completed. "I'll be going now," the Dragon King, Asa, said to his wife, sons, and daughter, who were all looking at him with worried looks on their faces. Seeing their expressions, the Dragon King chuckled. "Why are you all looking at me like this?" King Asa arched an eyebrow. "I am the strongest being in Elysium. Do you think I will croak before that bastard Kyoza does? Not happening." "Just come back to us safely, Asa," Queen Saphira said. "I will look after our children while you are away." King Asa nodded before kissing his wife's right cheek. He then glanced at his sons, as well as his daughter, Valerie, who was carrying Lux's child. He was still very annoyed that the half-elf had managed to worm his way inside his daughter's heart. Although she had completely forgotten about him, she was no longer ignorant of his name, thanks to Ari's stories about how they met in the past. Kyoza's powers were preventing Valerie and Ali from having a relapse, which would make them forget about him again. "I'm off," King Asa said before turning around. "Wait for my triumphant return." Without another word, he opened his draconic wings and flew to one of the floating islands in the sky, which would become his flagship during the war. Kyoza was also bidding his farewell to his wife, Queen Evangeline, and daughter, Aurelia. "I will return, just like how I returned to be with the two of you again," Kyoza said softly. "Evangeline, look after Aurelia and her unborn child." "I will," Queen Evangeline replied before kissing her husband's lips. "I'll be waiting, even if I have to wait forever." Kyoza's gaze softened as he hugged his wife close to him. A moment later, he also hugged his daughter, Aurelia, who was doing her best not to cry. "Believe in me, and believe in him," Kyoza said as he lightly patted his daughter's back. "Both of us will return to you." Aurelia nodded, holding back her tears. "May fortune be with you, father," Aurelia replied. "Both you and Lux are strong. I believe that the two of you will come back safely." Kyoza nodded. He then glanced at Lady Augustina, who was standing a few meters away from them, and nodded. The two then flew toward one of the crystal islands in the sky, which they had chosen to be their flagship for the war. On the floating island of Edea, Garrett and the members of Heaven's Gate stood in front of their guild headquarters and looked in the distance. When Kyoza arrived, he told them the true identity of their guild master, whom they had all forgotten. They were surprised, of course, but they recovered just as fast. All of them thought that the one who founded Heaven's Gate was a mysterious figure who had left them to explore the world. However, he left his daughter, Eiko, behind, who took the helm of Heaven's Gate for a period of time before she passed it to General Garrett. Eiko had her own battles to fight, and she couldn't always be at their guild headquarters to take charge of everything. Because of this, the guild operations were left to the two individuals who usually handled everything whenever Lux was away. Garrett, the one who handled matters that required the guild to mobilize, and Emma, the one who handled logistics and half of the administrative duties of their guild. "Is everyone ready?" Garrett asked. "Yes," Emma replied. Garrett nodded. "Good." The floating islands of Karshvar Draconis and the Crystal Palace all moved forward. There were also two other floating islands accompanying them. One looked like an altar, while the other looked like a floating graveyard. The Divine Army of Light and Memento Mori were also joining the battle. For the first time in hundreds of years, the two warring factions would fight side by side on the battlefield, which would decide the fate of their world once again. The Beastkins, the Agarthians, and the other members of the Alliance were riding on their own flying ships, flying at the rear of the floating islands, maintaining their battle formations. "Let's go," Garrett stated before raising his fist toward the sky. "For Heaven's Gate." All the guild members did the same and shouted in unison. For Heaven's Gate. Lux slept for an entire week, not opening his eyes even when Aurora washed his body in the small private pool of their room. His physical, emotional, and mental states weren't in their best condition after he returned to Elysium. It was only now that Lux could truly rest properly, so his body completely shut down to prevent the half-elf from waking up even once until he was fully recovered. When Lux opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was a cute little baby looking at him. Her beautiful golden eyes stared at him with curiosity, and a faint smile could be seen on her face. Lux thought that he might be in a dream, so he reached out his finger to lightly poke the baby's cheek. The smile on the baby's face widened, and her eyes looked as if they were smiling too. The half-elf couldn't help but feel his entire body turn warm with happiness, melting from the expression of the baby, whom he believed was his daughter, Diameter. A moment later, the baby's small hand reached out and grabbed Lux's finger, holding onto it. The half-elf slowly lowered his finger, but Dia still held onto it. A few seconds later, she yawned and closed her eyes to sleep while still holding onto the finger in her hand. Lux was only wearing a bathrobe without any underwear. It seems that Aurora thought that it wouldn't be a big deal to simply dress him in a bathrobe while he was sleeping. Soon, the half-elf sensed the presence of two other people as they entered the room. They were none other than Queen Rhiannon and Aurora, who had left Dia to look after her papa while he slept. "It seems that my sweetheart has become tired from watching over you, sleepyhead," Queen Rhiannon said in a teasing tone as she laid down beside her daughter, with her head resting on the palm of her hand. "Such an adorable scene," Aurora said softly as she, too, lay beside Lux, while resting her chin on the back of her intertwined hands. "I'm sure my baby will just be as cute as Diameter, perhaps even cuter." "Impossible," Queen Rhiannon was quick to shoot down Aurora's statement. "Nothing is cuter than my daughter." "But I'm also your daughter." "You know, you're actually right." The two beautiful women then giggled at the same time, but they immediately stopped when they saw Dia's face scrunched up in her sleep. As soon as they stopped making noise, Dia's face once again eased up as she continued to sleep peacefully while holding onto her papa's finger. "Let's just talk through telepathy, so we don't wake up Dia," Aurora said through telepathy. "Lux, I have something to tell you. While you were sleeping, James said that he would be gone for a week or two because he needed to attend his granddaughter's birthday party in his homeworld. Lord Antero also asked me to pass a message to you," Queen Rhiannon stated. "You should stay here for a week or two because he plans to give you something before you return to Elysium. He said that it is something that will help you when you fight against Nyarlathotep later on." Lux frowned after hearing the news that his return to Elysium would have to be delayed. Although he still had some of the white marbles that could instantly take him back to Elysium, he decided to not use them for now and wait until the Golem of Destruction had given him the thing that he could use to fight against the Outer God. Also, he didn't know if the white marble would still work since the connection between the Abyss and Elysium had been cut off. There was a possibility that he might be sent to some other place in the multiverse, and Lux didn't want to take the chance. He would rather wait for James to return and play it safe than be stranded in an unknown place for eternity. Now that he had become a supreme, his named creatures, as well as the members of his covenant, had stepped into the demigod rank. Even Eiko, who was in Elysium, received this boon, allowing her to step into the demigod rank as well. Lux felt restless because he didn't know what was happening in Elysium. His guild chat wasn't working, so he couldn't contact Aina, Aurelia, and Ari to ask for any news on their side. Perhaps, feeling his restlessness, Aurora untied the knot on Lux's bathrobe before taking it off his body. "Aurora, there is a baby here." Lux looked in disbelief at his lover, who had undressed him in a span of a few seconds. "Don't do anything that might be a bad influence on her. She is still a baby." Aurora blinked innocently at Lux before raising her hand to use telekinesis to make the vial of aromatic oil on top of the table fly toward her hand. After catching the vial, Aurora lathered her hand with a generous serving of aromatic oil before pressing it on the half-elf's leg. She then started to massage his leg with expert movements, making Lux gasp due to how good it felt. Aurora slowly worked her way downward to Lux's feet and lovingly kneaded his ankle, targeting the pressure points there. Once she was done, she also massaged his other leg. After that, her hands gradually moved higher and higher, teasing the sides of his lower abdomen, close enough to, but not touching, little Lux, who had started to twitch in anticipation. The half-elf knew exactly what Aurora was doing, but he didn't do anything to stop her and simply enjoyed the softness and strength of her hands, which were relieving him of the hidden aches in his body. A few minutes later, Queen Rhiannon gently pried Lux's index finger from Dia's grip so that he could turn to his stomach, allowing Aurora to massage his back. Lux couldn't help but sigh in relief as Aurora's hands applied pressure to his back, giving him the most amazing massage of his life. After Aurora was done massaging Lux's back, she flipped Lux over and straddled his waist. The half-elf's eyes widened in shock. Aurora was touching little Lux now and guiding him toward her entrance. "We can't, Aurora," Lux said. "Dia is here." "Who's here?" Aurora asked back with a mischievous smile on her beautiful face. Lux glanced to his side, only to find that Queen Rhiannon and their daughter were already gone from the room. While Aurora was massaging Lux's back, the succubus queen quietly carried her baby out of the room to go and see her grandpa Antero, who seemed to be working on something very important. Seeing that the baby was no longer inside the room, Lux shifted his attention back to Aurora, who slowly lowered her waist, taking him an inch by pleasurable inch. "Although not all massages end with a happy ending, you are deserving of one," Aurora said as she placed her hands on Lux's chest, using it as support. "Don't worry, Lux. A week will pass quickly in this place. All you need to do is enjoy your stay. If we're lucky, Dia might even get a new sister soon. So, do your best, okay? D.8 or .L.I.N.G." Aurora's seductive words and body were more than enough for Lux to not resist the happy ending that she promised him. And just like she said, a week passed by before he was even aware of it. James returned to the 13th layer of the abyss using a road made up of light. When Lux asked what method he used to return to the abyss so quickly, James only said that he connected the Bifrost Bridge to the 13th layer, allowing him to come and go as he pleased. The half-elf had no idea what this Bifrost Bridge was, but he had to admit that it was a very impressive means to travel between worlds. "Here you go, little Lux," Antero said as he handed the half-elf a black token. "Use this to summon me once. You don't need to pay a price for doing so." The half-elf gratefully accepted the token and gave it a closer look. The black token was smooth and cool to the touch. There was also a carved symbol that Lux didn't know the meaning of. But since Antero had told him what it was for, he did not ask any more questions and carefully stored it inside his storage ring. "Come back and visit us again, okay?" Queen Rhiannon said as she held Dia's hand and waved it side to side, making the baby say goodbye to Lux as well. "I'll be back," Lux replied in a firm tone. "Just sit tight until then." The succubus queen nodded before shifting her gaze to her daughter, Aurora. "You take care as well," Queen Rhiannon stated. "You already died once. I don't want to hear about you dying a second time." Aurora wanted to say that she hadn't only died once. After regaining the memories of her past lives and the time when she was still the goddess of Solais, she managed to consolidate her powers and break through to the demigod rank. She did it so subtly that no one noticed, with the exception of Antero, that another demigod was born on the 13th layer of the abyss. "Are both of you ready to go?" James asked. "Yes," Lux replied. Aurora, on the other hand, only nodded her head and sat behind Lux, holding onto him tightly. "Let's go, Sleipnir," James said. "Time to go back to Elysium." The eight-legged horse neighed before running toward the portal that would lead them to the 12th layer of the abyss. Queen Rhiannon and Antero looked at their retreating figures, knowing that their return trip to Elysium would be a long journey. The succubus queen hoped that the next time they met Lux, he would have already succeeded in dealing with the outer god, Nyarlathotep, who was now commanding the Abyssal Legion in Elysium. "Can they win, Lord Antero?" Queen Rhiannon asked the moment she felt that Lux and her daughter had finally left the 13th layer. "The possibility exists," Antero replied. Although there was a bit of uncertainty in Antero's tone, he believed that if there was one person who could stop Daniel from having his way, it would be the half-elf, who was on his way back to Elysium to deal with the pseudo-god's lackey. Passing through the 12th up to the 2nd layer was a breeze. Since no one dared to stop them, their journey was smooth and uneventful. However, when they reached the 1st layer of the abyss, Prima Donna appeared and blocked their path. "Leaving so soon?" Prima Donna inquired. "You still haven't dealt with Daniel, have you?" "I will deal with him soon, but not now," Lux replied. "I still need to return to Elysium to deal with his sidekick, Nyarlathotep. Once his right hand is eliminated, Daniel will lose his strongest backer. Prima Donna nodded her head because she, too, agreed with the half-elf's words. However, a sneer appeared on her face as she looked at the red-headed teenager who was about to leave the abyss. While it is true that killing Nyarlathotep would be a blow to Daniel, it will still not affect the outcome if you were to fight with him, Prima Donna stated. Also, once he gains another piece of the 5 pillars of eternity, he might find a way to break some rules of the abyss, allowing him to reach this place. When that happens, it will only be a matter of time before he finds the closest world to your world and uses that as a springboard to go to Elysium. When that happens, you're as good as dead. Lux could only smile after hearing Prima Donna's words. He was certain that what the demigoddess wanted was for him to face Daniel and possibly injure him, causing a delay in the pseudo-god's plans. However, this wasn't feasible. Battling against Daniel now was pure suicide, and the only thing that would help him in a fight against him was to gather the pieces of eternity, giving him a chance to win. Prima, my dear, I'm sorry, but we didn't return here to listen to your chatter, James stated. Now, if you'll excuse us, we still need to travel for a month to return to Elysium. Don't delay us any further, or I'll stab you. The corner of the demigoddess's lips twitched after hearing James' threat. Fine, Prima Donna hissed. Go back and help that little half-elf save his world. But the only thing he can do is delay the inevitable. It's still better than going on a suicide mission just to appease a demigod who fears for her life, Lux replied in a calm manner. Brat, you sure have a way with words, Prima Donna sneered. Why don't you use that against Daniel? Maybe, just maybe, he will allow you and your people to live as his slaves for eternity. Lux didn't bother to reply to the demigoddess because he knew that talking to her was useless. James shared the same line of thought, so he lightly tapped Sleipnir's neck and urged his steed to leave the abyss. Prima Donna watched them go with an annoyed expression on her face. Despite the 13th up to the first layer being cut off from the rest of the abyss, she still couldn't help but notice a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. It was as if it was really only a matter of time before Daniel found a way to bypass Antero's seal and fully claim the abyss as his own domain. A week passed before the Alliance arrived in the western regions of Elysium. The devastation that they had seen made even the most veteran warriors turn pale. Countless kingdoms and empires had been razed to the ground, their rich history gone, their dignities trampled. Those who passed through these places didn't know what had happened to their people. There was not a single corpse that could be seen laying on the ground. Maybe they've been eaten, one of the Dragonborns muttered. His statement wasn't far-fetched because abyssal creatures were technically monsters and demons. They ate the flesh of other demons, so eating the flesh of humans and the other races of Elysium was normal to them. If they were eaten, then good, a beastkin commented. But if they weren't, I can't even think about the fate that befell them. No one knew how to reply to the beastkin's comment. If the people of these kingdoms and empires were indeed eaten, then they would no longer suffer. Unfortunately for them, those that had been killed by the abyssal creatures would find their souls in the abyss. Given time, all of them would be reborn as abyssal monsters. Monsters who might one day return to Elysium, not as comrades, but as enemies. This realization made many people frown, but there was nothing they could do about it. As they traveled deeper into the western parts of Elysium, they noticed that the color of the ground had changed. The land had been corrupted, making it look purple. Still, they didn't see any signs of life for miles on end. Their scouts, who had been tasked to report if they found anything, were unable to find any trace of the abyssal army. Finally, after 2 weeks of scouring the western regions of Elysium, they finally found the base of their enemies. A massive stronghold that stretched out for miles and stood hundreds of meters tall made the faces of the Elysians turn grim. The formation of the floating islands came to a halt, preparing to attack their enemies from a distance. During their journey, they had already discussed the strategy that they were going to use. None of them would engage the enemy right away and simply unleash a barrage of spells, forcing their enemies to make a move. They believed that this was the safest and most effective strategy because it would prevent their people from needing to fight their enemies in close combat. Battle stations. Great General Garrett ordered, and the members of Heaven's Gate all went to action. Countless cannons emerged from the floating island, as the dwarves and the orcs worked together to create the magical cannons that they had seized long ago. 10 giant cannons, which they called Giga Cannons, served as the flying fortress' strongest cannons. All of them could unleash a barrage that could hit a target from 15 miles away, making it the longest long-distance weapon in the Alliance. The other magical cannons that they currently had could only hit targets up to 5 miles, which would force them to move closer to their opponent in order to land a hit. But just as the Alliance was preparing their air strike, countless fireballs descended from the sky and fell on their formation like rain. Himph! King Asa flew upwards and erected a barrier that covered the entirety of the islands that belonged to Karshvar Draconis. Kyoza did the same, keeping the islands under his command safe. The rest of the Alliance was quick to act and positioned themselves under the floating islands of the 2 dragon kingdoms, using them as a shield to avoid getting hit. But not all the flying ships were able to react quickly, so some of them caught aflame, forcing them to abandon ship or make emergency landings on the ground. The floating island of Edia was a good distance away, so no rain of fireballs landed on it. Fire! Garrett commanded. Soon, the Giga Cannons all roared to life, unleashing a barrage of death upon the abyssal fortress in the distance. The cannonballs they were using were Glee's modified blast bombs. They weren't as strong as nuclear-level blast bombs, but they were still half as powerful. The Alliance cheered after seeing their counterattack land on the enemy's fortress, destroying bits and pieces of it. Annihilate them all. King Asa ordered. Open fire. The Dragonborns and the dragons all took flight and unleashed their dragon breaths at the same time. Meanwhile, the Alliance used their long-range attacks to commence bombardment on their enemies, who were also counterattacking using long-distance spells and ammunition of their own. Sounds of explosion reverberated in the surroundings as both sides pummeled each other with the intention of wiping their enemies from the face of the world. This was how the battle started between the Abyssal forces and the Alliance of Elysium. Nyarlathotep watched this battle from the throne room inside the Abyssal fortress with an amused look on his face. Dozens of Abyssal lords were in the throne room with him, and all of them were looking at their enemies with calm expressions on their faces. Nyarlathotep had already told them the strategy they were going to use, and they had to admit that it was a very devious strategy. They almost felt sorry for the Alliance because they had no idea how this battle between them was going to turn out. Stick to the plan, Nyarlathotep commanded. Lure them, and make sure that none of you fools die. Make yourselves useful for once, okay? Over a dozen Abyssal lords left the throne room to fulfill their part in this battle that would determine the fate of Elysium. Each of these Abyssal lords commanded over 100 Calamity-ranked monsters each, making their forces very deadly. The enemies are finally making their move, Kyoza said, relaying the changes of the battlefield to Great General Garrett, who was at the very rear of the formation, providing supportive and offensive fire. They are on the right side of the fortress. The Great General didn't waste any time and barked a series of orders to his people. Main cannons at 3 o'clock. Great General Garrett commanded. Immediately, the Giga Cannons moved to aim at the right side of the battlefield. When he received the signal from his people, Great General Garrett gave out new orders to his men. Load the nukes. Great General Garrett ordered. Give them hell. As soon as the cannons were loaded with their weapons of mass destruction, they once again unleashed a barrage at their enemies. Daniel had explained to the Outer God in detail how Lux had fought his forces when he crossed over to the Abyss. He mentioned that the half-elf had used powerful bombs, whose strength rivaled the nuclear weapons from Earth. Since Daniel was also an Earthling, he knew these weapons very well. He then used Azathoth's ability to detect these kinds of weapons, allowing him and Nyarlathotep to know if they were being used in battle. Nyarlathotep, who was waiting for this, sneered and snapped his fingers. The entire fortress was then covered by a purple dome of light. The moment the nukes collided with the barrier, all of them bounced off and flew towards the Alliance, making Kyoza's eyes widen in shock. The crystal dragon didn't hesitate and transformed into his dragon form and unleashed a dragon's breath, encasing the blast bombs in crystals, preventing them from exploding. Nyarlathotep chuckled after seeing this scene. Daniel had warned him about these powerful weapons, and had even given him the ability to sense if they were being used on the battlefield. The Outer God wasn't disappointed that the nukes didn't blow up in their enemies' faces. He just found everything that was happening in the battle very amusing. The Abyssal Lords who had waited for the blast bombs to lose their effectiveness charged out of the fortress and hurled long-distance attacks at the Alliance. The Supremes of the Alliance all moved at once to intercept their attacks and engage their enemies before they could reach their formation. King Azza, Kyoza, and Lady Augustina were among those that fought in the vanguard, while the Beast King and the other Supremes remained in their flying ships to prepare for any contingencies. The giant flying altar, which served as the Divine Army's flying fortress, broke rank and charged towards the enemy fortress. Countless pseudo-supremes jumped off from the floating island and engaged the calamity-ranked monsters that belonged to the Abyssal Lords. The Bone Fortress of Memento Mori also charged forward as countless wraiths, specters, and undead monsters descended upon the battlefield, eager to reap the lives of their enemies. A chaotic battle ensued, with friend and foe clashing against the hordes of abyssal monsters that seemed to have all entered a berserk state. The fighting was fierce, and allies and foes alike died in battle. Those that died were immediately reanimated to fight again, which was the specialty of the necromancers who belonged to Memento Mori. This was one of the reasons why the Elysians hated fighting against necromancers. More deaths on the battlefield means more soldiers for them, so the first tactic used against Necromancer was to kill them directly before they could summon more undead and increase their forces. However, Nyarlathotep wasn't worried about this matter, and the Alliance quickly noticed this as well. The ones who noticed this first were none other than the Necromancers themselves. Just as they were about to reanimate the dead, these dead creatures suddenly transformed into abominations with many eyes and dozens of tentacles protruding from their body. They looked very eerie and revolting, making those who see them shudder subconsciously. The Necromancers frowned after seeing these abominations, so they sent the majority of their forces to kill them. They planned to kill these creatures and reanimate them afterward. But it didn't take long before they realized that these monsters couldn't be revived. The moment they died, they immediately shriveled and turned to ash, leaving nothing else behind. Even so, the Alliance didn't falter and continued to attack their enemies. An hour later, King Azza ordered his men to sound the horn to retreat. From the beginning, they understood that this war couldn't be won in a day. They were simply testing to see what their enemies were capable of doing. Kyoza had warned everyone that Nyarlathotep was an outer god. Although its rank had degraded to the peak of the demigod rank, it was still an outer god, making it more powerful than the rest of the Abyssal Lords under his command. They had also been informed about its ability to make clones and unleash a suicide attack, like it had tried to do in Agartha. Although they suffered casualties in the first round of battle, they were still satisfied with the results. While neither side managed to kill a demigod or a supreme during their initial clash, hundreds of calamity-ranked monsters and lower-ranking monsters died in their first face-off. The Divine Army of Light had also lost a tenth of their apostles, contributing to most of the kills of the calamity-ranked monsters. Nyarlathotep didn't order his subordinates to pursue the Alliance, who retreated 50 miles away from the battlefield. This distance could easily be covered in a few minutes, so either side could attack anytime. After stationing their watchers and scouts at the forefront of the battlefield, the various leaders of the Alliance went to the flagship of King Azza and discussed the battle that just transpired. For the time being, don't use your nukes in battle, Kyoza said as he looked at Great General Garrett. One mistake and it will be our forces who might get wiped out by our own weapons. The temporary leader of Heaven's Gate nodded his head in understanding. We will use normal rounds to attack the Abyssal Fortress next time, Great General Garrett replied. King Azza addressed the members of Memento Mori, who were also present in the meeting room. Those abominations that appeared on the battlefield earlier, what do you make of them? King Azza asked the leader of Memento Mori, who sat across from him. Very alien and very dangerous, the old necromancer replied. The most annoying thing about them is that they all look the same. You never know if you are fighting against a calamity-ranked monster or a lower-ranking creature. That outer god has many tricks up his sleeves. Do you have any methods to stop them? Kyoza asked. Or perhaps you can reanimate the dead faster than the outer god? The old necromancer shook his head. We tried to outpace him earlier, but it was futile. He can revive them faster than we do. At most, the conversion rate is 4 out of 10. We can reanimate 4 out of 10, while he can create 6 of those abominations. They have the upper hand in a battle of attrition. Truth be told, the Alliance were hoping that they would be able to overpower their enemies with the help of the Necromancers. The initial clash proved that the enemy had a similar ability, and they proved to be as deadly as the Undead Legion under Memento Mori's command. Neither side has unleashed their strongest combatants yet and are simply testing each other, King Azza stated. I suggest we retreat 100 miles to let everyone have a proper rest before we fight them tomorrow. We have been traveling for a very long time, and the men still need to recover from the journey. This suggestion was met with the approval of all the leaders. After their meeting ended, the Alliance retreated another 100 miles so that their fighters could rest. Tomorrow, the battle would be longer and bloodier, which would make both sides understand that their enemies had not been serious in the exchange that they just had a few hours ago.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.